Sense and sensory awareness. Introduction. This lecture introduces pupils, psychologists to the meaning of awareness of outside and the internal world of our own bodies through the study of sensation, perception, stimulus, and the sense. Objectives. At the end of this lecture, you should be able to 1. Explain the concepts of sensation, perception, and stimulus as used in the field of psychology, and 2. Discuss the relationship existing between sensation and perception. Pretest. What is a sense? 2. What is sensation? 3. Provide brief explanation of your understanding of perception and stimulus. Content. Definition of sense. There is no firm agreement among neurologists as to the number of senses because of differing definitions of what constitutes a sense. One definition states that an exteroceptive sense is a faculty by which outside stimuli are perceived. The traditional 5 senses are sight, hearing, touch, smell, taste, a classification attributed to Aristotle. Humans also have at least 6 additional senses, a total of 11 including interoceptive senses that include nociception, pain, equilibrioception, balance, proprioception, and kinesthesia, joint motion and acceleration, sense of time, thermoception, temperature differences, and in some a weak magnetoception, direction. One commonly recognized categorization for human senses is as follows: chemoreception, photoreception, mechanoreception, and thermoception. Indeed, all human senses fit into one of these 4 categories. Different senses also exist in other animals. For example, electroreception. A broadly acceptable definition of a sense would be a system that consists of a group of sensory cell types that respond to a specific physical phenomenon and that correspond to a particular group of regions within the brain where the signals are received and interpreted. Disputes about the numbers of senses typically arise around the classification of the various cell types and their mapping to regions of the brain. Senses. Sight. Sight or vision is the ability of the brain and eye to detect electromagnetic waves within the visible range light, interpreting the image as sight. There is disagreement as to whether this constitutes 1, 2, or 3 senses. Neuroanatomists generally regard it as 2 senses, given that different receptors are responsible for the perception of color, the frequency of photons of light, and brightness, amplitude or intensity number of photons of light. Some argue that stereopsis, this perception of depth, also constitutes a sense, but it is generally regarded as a cognitive, that is, post-sensory function of brain to interpret sensory input and to derive new information. The inability to see is called blindness. Hearing or audition is the sense of sound perception. Since sound is vibrations propagating through a medium such as air, the detection of these vibrations, that is, the sense of the hearing, is a mechanical sense, akin to a sense of touch, albeit a very specialized one. In humans, this perception is executed by tiny hair fibers in the inner ear, which detect motion of a membrane which vibrates in response to changes in the pressure exerted by atmospheric particles within a range of 20 to 22,000 Hz, with substantial variation between individuals. Sound can also be detected as vibrations conducted through the body by tactation. Lower and higher frequencies than that can be heard are detected this way only. The inability to hear is called deafness. Taste or gustation is one of the two main chemical senses. There are at least 4 types of taste that both receptors on the tongue detect, given that each receptor conveys information to a slightly different region of the brain. The inability to taste is called ageusia. The 4 well-known receptors detect something sweet, salt, sour, and bitter, although the receptors for something sweet and bitter have not been conclusively identified. A 5th receptor for a sensation called umami was first theorized in 1908 and its existence confirmed in 2000. The umami receptor detects the amino acid glutamate, a flavor commonly found in meat and in artificial flavorings such as monosodium glutamate. Note that taste is not the same as flavor. Flavor includes the smell of a food as well as its taste. Smell or olfaction is the other chemical sense. Unlike taste, there are hundreds of olfactory receptors, each binding to a particular molecular feature. Other molecules possess a variety of features and thus excite specific receptors more or less strongly. This combination of excitatory signals from different receptors makes up what we perceive as the molecule smell. In the brain, olfaction is processed by the olfactory system. Olfactory receptor neurons in the nose differ from most other neurons in that they die and regenerate on a regular basis. The inability to smell is called anosmia. Some neurons in the nose are specialized to detect pheromones. Touch is also called mechanoreception or somatic sensation. It's the sense of pressure perception, generally in the skin. There are a variety of nerve endings that respond to variations in pressure. For example, firm, brushing, and sustained. The inability to feel anything or almost anything is called anesthesia. Paresthesia is a sensation of tingling, pricking, or numbness of a person's skin with no apparent long-term physical effect. Balance and acceleration. Balance, equilibrioception or vestibular sense, is the sense which allows an organism to sense body movement, direction and acceleration, and to attain and maintain postural equilibrium and balance. The organ of equilibrioception is a vestibular labyrinthine system found in both of the inner ears. Technically, this organ is responsible for two senses: angular momentum and linear acceleration, which also senses gravity. But they're also known together as equilibrioception. The vestibular nerve conducts information from the three semicircular canals corresponding to the three spatial planes, the utricle and the circle, the ampulla or base portion of the three semicircular canals. Each contains a structure called a crista. This bends in response to angular momentum or spinning. The circle and utricle, also called the otolith organs, sense linear acceleration and thus gravity. Otoliths are small crystals of calcium carbonate that provide the inertia needed to detect changes in acceleration or gravity. Temperature. Thermoception is the sense of heat and the absence of heat, cold, by the skin and including internal skin passages. The thermoceptors in the skin are quite different from the homeostatic thermoceptors in the brain, hypothalamus, which provide feedback or internal body temperature. Kinesthetic sense. Proprioception, the kinetic sense, provides the parietal cortex of the brain with information on the relative positions of the parts of the body. Neurologists test this sense by telling patients to close their eyes and touch the tip of a finger to their nose. Assuming proper proprioceptive function, at no time will the person lose awareness of where the hand actually is, even though it is not being detected by any of the other senses. Proprioception and touch are related in subtle ways, and their impairment results in surprising and deep deficits in perception and action. Pain. Nociception. Physiological pain. Signal near damage or damage to tissue. The three types of pain receptors are cutaneous, skin; somatic, joints and bones; viscera, body organs. It was believed that pain was simply the overloading of pressure receptors, but research in the first half of the 20th century indicated that pain is a distinct phenomenon that intertwines with all of the other senses, including touch. Pain was once considered an entirely subjective experience, but recent studies show that pain is registered in the anterior cingulate gyrus of the brain. Sensation and awareness. Sensation is the process of receiving, translating, and transmitting messages from the outside world to the brain. LaHaye, 2004. Sensation is equally defined as the immediate experience of basic properties of an object of events that occurs when a receptor is stimulated. Sensory receptor cells are cells inside sense organs which receive outside forms of energy and translate them into neural impulses that can be transmitted to the brain for interpretation. When enough physical energy strikes a receptor cell, the cell sends neural impulses to the brain. It is the signal sent by these receptors that cause us to become aware of the outside world. Perception, on the other hand, is derived from an English word perceive, that is, to become aware of something through the senses, to comprehend or grasp a stimulus. Perception arises from the subjective experiences of objects or events that ordinarily result from stimulation of receptor organs of the body. The definition has taken different perceptives to mean insight, intuition, and knowledge gained by perceiving. Perception also is the act, process, faculty of perceiving, organizing, and interpreting sensory inputs as signaling a particular object or event. More so, perception involves the neurological processes by which recognition and interpretation are affected. By specialized receptors, the stimulation is transformed or encoded into neural activity. A key conception in understanding sensation and perception is stimulus. The term stimulus comes from the action of sensory receptor cells, and it refers to any aspect of the outside world that directly influences our behavior or conscious experience. Psychologists call the registration of sensation when a physical event excites the appropriate receptors early processing, but this not yet perception. Perception includes two major phases: immediate processing and late processing. By immediate processing, the input is organized into coherent units, while in late processing, the perceptual system interprets the meaning. Early, immediate, and late processing seems to indicate a simple sequential process, but more is happening. Processing may be bottom-up, initiated by stimulus, or top-down, guided by knowledge, expectation, or belief. The two sorts of processes could be in play at the same time. Summary. In this lecture, we learned that our brains are not in direct contact with the outside world, but sensory receptor cells have the ability to transduce physical energy into coded neural messages that are sent to the brain sensation, where they are interpreted, that is perception. We realized that not all forms of physical energy could become part of our perception of the world. We must have sensory receptor cells that can transduce that form of energy, and the stimulation must be strong enough to exceed the sensory threshold. Our perception of external reality is complicated because there is no simple and direct relationship between the properties of physical stimuli and our conscious sensations. Finally, we learned that external stimuli could only be perceived through the senses. This is the end of study session 4. Thanks for listening.